Hey everyone, Larry Walsh here for Channelnomics, and this is Changing Channels. A staple of many channel programs is partner advisory councils or partner advisory boards. These are the gatherings of sometimes the most elite partners within a program or a cross section of the partners. They come together with the vendors to exchange information, give feedback, express ideas, and brainstorm solutions to problems that are common to every partner within a program. Now, I call PABs, as they're routinely referred to, as a staple of programs, but doesn't necessarily mean that they're always run well or run consistently. There are too many vendors out there that treat their PABs as checkbox items. It's something that they're supposed to do, not something that they see actual need to do. Pulling off a successful advisory board meeting takes a lot of planning, a lot of coordination, and a lot of intent. And most of all, it requires commitment to actually working with partners, not as an event, but as a process by which you're able to exchange information, get feedback, and then act on it. A company that actually does this rather well, in my opinion, is Ivanti. Now, Ivanti is a company that has a diverse portfolio of products as well as partners. And so they're using their advisory board to gather information to create bridges across its different categories. So we asked Michelle Hodges, their Senior Vice President of Global Channels and Alliances, to join us here in Changing Channels to talk about what it takes to actually build a vibrant, dynamic, and productive partner advisory board. This is Changing Channels. Let's get into it. And with that, welcome to Changing Channels, Michelle Hodges.
Hey, Larry, how's it going?
It's been a while since we've had you on Changing Channels. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for the time.
Well, like I know we're going to talk about advisory boards and why they're important to channel programs as well as channel management, but I want to start with something a little bit interesting and personal about you. You are a world traveler,
I,
and you're also fluent in French.
I am.
Tell, tell us just to start off with this conversation, where did that come from? Where did you get the drive to speak French fluently?
Well, you also know my dad was in the military, so I got a good start, right? I've lived in 7 countries over, gosh, 60% of my life at this point has been overseas. And when I was in high school, of course, the school made me take a language, but my dad was always, if we have this international life, you're gonna have to speak a language. So I just kind of followed on with it through college. When I went to graduate school, I went to the Monterey Institute, which is a Middlebury school for my MBA. 70% of your language your courses had to be taken in your language A. Just carried on. And then, fortunate, I've spent probably upwards of 5 years living in France. And then to cap it off, I sent my daughter to a French school here in Portland, Oregon. So now we have a whole community of French people that we socialize with and have built our community around. So yeah, just kept it up over time.
Well, I know some people who are just, starting to listen in on this and going, okay, what does this have to do with channels or PAB? And I, like you, travel around the world. I lived in Europe at one point when I was in the military. One of the things I find disappointing nowadays is that most places where I go to in the world, I don't have to try anymore. That I can speak English and everybody just communicates back, but it doesn't eliminate the communications gaps. There's still a lot of times where you, even if you're speaking in the same language, the colloquialisms, the mannerisms, the references, they don't translate very well. And I find that to be disconcerting that we can be that comfortable, or even, I dare say sometimes arrogant, to think that we can just walk into any
At
country and
worst,
still speak English.
at worst, ignorant, right?
Yeah.
We're just going through, we're going through a lot of transition here at Ivanti, and as we take our customers through this SaaS and sub transition, it's hard for some of our partners. And just talking about a Japanese partner, where I really want to visit with them and treat them well and reinvest in them for their experience. But how do you go to Japan, for example, and pay for dinner and organize dinner and give the presents? So it is language, it's cultural, it's situation, all of those things is important. So we shouldn't think that It feels easy, I think, thanks to frequent flyer miles and automated customs, but it's not as easy as that.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I think there definitely is a need for sensitivities
Yeah,
to be able
absolutely.
to respect people's cultures and be able to show them that there's a respect and appreciation.
Yeah.
Um, I wanted to use that though as a transition to what we are here to talk about, and advisory boards, or some companies call them advisory councils, but these are staples
Mm.
of channel programs. And a couple of months ago, yeah, no, but a couple of months ago, you had one for Ivanti, your partners, and you know, let's start with this though. Is that I think, at least from my perspective, a lot of the companies that we deal with, a lot of the people, like I deal with at your level, they'll think about an advisory board as something that they're supposed to do, but not necessarily as something that they need to do,
Mm.
or it's one of those check boxes that said, okay, this is on the books. I got to do this. What's the point of even having a partner advisory board?
Yeah, I'll start at the very highest level, right? Let's remember that at Channels and Alliances function, wherever you sit in your organization, you're not a silo, you don't stand alone. You are wholly dependent on every other function in the organization for you and your partners to be successful in your partnerships. And that goes from marketing to product to finance to operations, IT, all of those things. And you rarely get to make any decisions or investments to help make your partner successful on your own. So you need those stakeholders, you need those investments from the rest of the business. Conversely, your partners are not individuals themselves. They're extensions of yourself, of your selling organization, your marketing organization, your engineering organization, and sometimes. And so how do you create an environment where you can step out of that silo and connect all of those stakeholder groups for progress? And for
Yeah.
me, that's what a partner advisory group does, is it extends my leadership team out into my partners, but also exposes my stakeholders in the organization to a different level of conversation, not really just I need this, let me give you that, to a more collaborative style of conversation to drive joint success.
I like what you just said about exposing your stakeholders and your management. And in advisory board meetings that I've facilitated and participated in, um, I hear people from the chief revenue officer, CEO, the CEO, that they'll show up for these things. And they'll even talk about it, even like in the preparation calls. They'll say, like, oh, I'm always meeting with our partners. And typically, because advisory boards are made up of top partners, that there is some level of communication and connection that's already there. But it also mystifies me that they also kind of walk away from these meetings like they didn't know something, that they were surprised.
Hmm.
Is that a core function of all this, is that there's always going to be some element of surprise. There is going to be something situational or circumspect that has to be dealt with, that having multiple partners in the room like that exposed to your leadership to actually get the message across.
Yeah, I mean, a QBR or a site visit or a trade show where you get to have dinner with a partner, but that's not an isolated incident, right? And also, you have a lot of people at the table when you're doing that. Um, Great communication comes across a cadence of activities, which includes those QBRs, also includes a partner advisory board. And so I'll dig in a little bit there. I would say within that, there also needs to be some sort of survey function to test the pulse of what you're hearing across all of those activities and to make sure you're prepared for the different pieces. But when you get to an advisory board, say you've had your QBRs that year, you've had a dinner, you've done your survey, you then bring a small segment of that group into a room without all those other people, right? So you don't have any, and you know me, I'm very pedantic about this. Don't have any channel account managers, you don't have any marketing managers, you have the executives who are making decisions, and you take all of that information together as a cohort who are successfully looking at the business to make decisions there. Very different than what happens at a QBR. I think additionally for like a CRO, when you get into a partner advisory board and you've done all of that work that leads up to it, you have commonalities, right? You have cohorts of opinion and of problems and issues or ideas that you want to go execute, which is very different than when you can get in a single one-to-one conversation at a QBR with a lot of ears listening, right? You can be more effective in an advisory environment, I think.
So I want to come back to the information gathering and preparation on this, because there's varying opinions around who should actually be a part of an advisory board.
Yeah.
And our best practice, Genomics, we have a PAB best practices standard. The things we recommend. Ultimately, every vendor is going to do it their own way. They have their own opinions, but we do recommend having a cross section. It shouldn't just be your top partners. It should be representative of the community that you're associated with.
Mhm.
How do you go about selecting those that get to participate?
I think it's situational to what you're trying to do with your business, right? We are very much in a high growth, high transition, high transformation environment. And so making sure we have representative competencies, um, um, voices, like weights of voices within the channel, right? There are some who have a louder voice and a louder opinion. Representative intellects. There are some who know things over others, as well as routes to market. But I do think it's very situational to what you're trying to get done and what all of that pre-work, which I think we'll get into here in a minute,
Mhm.
tells you need to focus on. Does that make sense?
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. But I mean, I think that like anything else, um, we do a lot of surveys of partners on behalf of vendors to do this type of information gathering. We interview partners, and it it's not that the partners don't often share their honest opinion about the totality of the relationship or whatever it happens to be, the quality of the relationship. But there's also an element of time that comes into this.
Yeah.
Is that we as human beings tend to default to the last thing that happened to us,
Yeah.
or the last bad thing that happened to us that's going to stick with us for a while. And that's when devolving into, these PAB meetings can often sometimes devolve into, for the lack of a better way of describing a bitch session.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, you get these guys in the room and they start feeding off of each other. And so how do you craft an agenda so that you get across the information that you need to get across, you get the feedback that you need to get, but you also are able to let them have their say, regardless of whatever it is, without going off the rails.
Yeah. I think we've learned this together over the years, right? There are a couple instances when you have advisory boards that are non-monitored or you don't have a third party. I personally don't do that anymore. I only have third person monitored and facilitated partner advisory boards. I might do roundtables, particularly at a smaller regional level. But this I make very formal in a couple different ways. One, it's facilitated. Um, Two, it's a working session, right? And it's not a readout. There's so many advisory boards that I've run and been guilty of running, where you bring your executives in and they spend 3 hours presenting and there's 20 minutes of conversation, then you go for lunch. Nothing actually gets done there. And in our advisory sessions, right, we have an evolving conversation over 4 quarters, and there's work to be done by both Ivanti, Channelnomics, and the partner that they've got to bring back and to do some work together. So that working advisory council is a very important component to me because there's skin in the game. I think we'll talk, then there's the pre-work, right? To get there as well. So we talked about your QBRs, your roundtables, but your surveys. Additionally, working with you, we spend months in advance interviewing a wide swath of stakeholders internal to Ivanti. And so I would say C-level +1 and +2, right? Wide swath of those folks of what they're observing. And then spend a lot of time with the advisory board members and perhaps a couple of other folks that they designate to ask questions. What are you seeing? What do you want to talk about? What do you like? What do you don't like? And the rest of it. Another thing that I love is that there's touch points with me and my team in between that, right?
Mm-hmm.
To say, hey, we're hearing this. What does that make you feel? Whether it's internal to Ivanti or external to partners. So we can start forming an image of what we're hearing through all this listening. And then a really important critical point is to, as part of the working product, is to send that out to the advisory board members and say, this is what we heard. If we spoke about this in agenda, is that what you want to do with your time? And then there's a couple more tweaks, and then we go and we meet, and then rinse and repeat and rinse and repeat as you go forward. It's pretty
Yeah.
good. I like it.
Yeah, like, and I'll clarify is that, Channelnomics does work with Avanti on its advisory board. We facilitated it earlier this year.
Yeah.
And you're right, we spend a lot of time talking with you, your team, your partners, understanding what's going on. It does take a lot of work. It's not a let's just get together at some nice hotel, you can have a dinner or two
Yeah.
and everybody can just talk. There actually does need to be more thought and consideration put into it.
But I love, I come out of that with a clear set of marching orders for me and my team that everyone's aligned to, right?
Yeah.
My internal stakeholders, the partners, we've got a clear set of direction of things we've got to go get done, improvements or investments or, I love it.
Well, I mean, that's a good question or a good way to pivot here because yeah, there's a lot of prep that goes into planning a PAB, but there's also a lot of information that comes out of it, whether it was structured or unstructured. And frankly, I always like listening to the unstructured side,
Mm.
meaning that yeah, we can plan for X, Y, and Z because that's what we're looking for feedback on, but there's always going to be that intangible conversation that's either happening on the side or happening in the hallway or happening over dinner that we weren't anticipating, that enriches it. But where does all this information go? What do you do to catalog it and then prioritize it and then track it? How does this manifest itself into that action plan that you were just describing?
Okay, I mean, saying structured and unstructured, I think is really important, right? Because the unstructured is just as powerful. Normally, there will be one point where a stakeholder, a function, thinks they're doing all the right things, and they get all this validated information and data back that, oh, wait, maybe I'm not doing it the right way. And that is internalized in how they go about their business when they go back to their day jobs and drives change in a more profound way than any action plan I could ever write. So those nuggets are always the best ones when there's a team thinking they've got it right and they see where they need to adjust. However, for the structured data, you always have a scribe, normally the person who runs the program internally, who takes all the notes. And I think we do double blind notes with you all, right? So we have
Yes.
two scribes, so that they could work together to come and bring that together. Then working with another set of internal stakeholders to validate that, sharing it back with the partner advisory board to validate that that's what they heard, which then gets turned into an action plan, which is then folded into my overall strategy and plan.
Yeah.
So,
One of the things, and I'm glad to hear you say that, okay, that you bring it back out to the partners, the
mm,
participants. Because I've had this conversation with numerous partners over the years, and we asked them to give up a couple of days of their time, come to a meeting, go through the pre-reads, participate in these planning meetings that go into it. And one thing that I get consistently is we'll come in, we'll participate, but make it worth our while for us. Make it a valuable use of our time. How do you demonstrate that value to a partner that this is worth their, giving up a couple of days? Because many of the partners on your PAB are participating in other PABs as well. And
yeah.
so this is not 2 days. This is series of days that it goes on.
Um, the most important piece is the ongoing cadence, right? The follow up, and then your next partner advisory board, and you've done that work, and you find your next set of items you want to do. But within that, I think it's the pre-work to really listen and then agree on action that you're all invested in and have to work on, right? Um, Too often, and I've done this in my past, creating a partner advisory council as an event, a space and time, as opposed to a continuum, and a working group,
Yeah.
towards rolling objectives, right? They change over time.
I look, and this one again, talking about our best practices,
Mm.
is that you're right. It can't be a point in time. It actually has to be. It has to be dynamic, and it has to be committed to it. Is that this is an annual. This is an annual process. It isn't a let's get together twice a year.
Yeah. And it's,
Uh,
at Ivanti, we have established a community, right? So if you're in a pricing call, there's a question, have we asked the partner advisory board? Have we if we're going to do something, have we asked the partner advisory board? You creating a group that has a voice, I think, is really important.
How do you justify the expense of doing this though? Because it's not cheap to bring 20 or 30 people together for a conversation, for a day or two of conversations. You're flying people in from different, whether you're doing it regionally or you're doing it globally. There is an expense that comes with this. How do you justify that to the guys who control your budget?
Well, so the event costs, you try to do it where everyone's already going to be, right? So whether it's a customer conference or a partner conference, you really try to align to those schedules. I would encourage any channel chief out there to align your entire event calendar to that of the go-to-market organization, as opposed to kind of creating something separate. Makes things a lot easier. I think in terms of the justifying the facilitation cost and the management cost and the consulting cost from it, for me, it's almost an opportunity cost, right? You won't, the time you spent in the first one, if you don't properly run it and administer the action and the follow-up, that's a lost cost. You won't get any benefit from it. And in our case, this is a high transformation environment, and if you want to stay at pace, you have to make the investment to drive that. It's a function of driving the change.
I like that idea that the partners are there to drive the change. But how do you measure that outcome? I mean, so because again, voice of experience, and I've had the benefit of working with organizations like yours that takes this very seriously, and I work with some that treat it like a checkbox.
Mhm.
So, but even so, you bring this feedback in. How do you know which ones are the right action items to actually press against? And how do you then measure that, yeah, you took action and that action had a material impact on the partners and on your program's performance?
To be fair, there is some leading the witness in the information gathering stage, because we do start with those things the company is trying to do. Now, you will know that I am a very ELT board-led channel executive, which means I look to the board and our organization to understand what we need to do to be successful from a cost perspective, efficiency perspective, and all of those things. And then define that strategy, working with my team and my partners to say, hey, what are the things that we can do to help the company grow, which in turn, and in turn, being sure that I'm defining value to the partners. So there is leading the witness by, hey, we can talk about whatever we want, but let's talk about them in these 3 boxes that are aligned to the strategy that we're trying
Right.
to drive. And then you'll also know that I'm pretty metric driven, right? And I've got a whole bag of tricks in terms of, if you want to measure EBITDA, these are the metrics you do. If you want to manage pipeline strength, is what you do. If you want to measure strategic partner investments. So I think it's understanding what your strategy is, knowing that you've got good metrics for that, and then building your action plan and then measuring accordingly.
I I just because of curiosity, Ivanti is the latest company you've done this at. You've done this before in your previous gigs. Um, you don't have to give specifics,
Mm.
but what's the best piece of feedback you've gotten from an advisory board? And then we'll come back and we'll look at the worst and the most surprising. So what's a good thing, something that you got back and said, yeah, that's the missing piece that I was looking for.
Um, So we are, Ivanti, if you know anything about Ivanti, we are a group of acquisitions that we're bringing together into a single purpose-built platform that connects the CIO and the CISO, right? Called the Neurons platform, allowing them to discover, manage service, and secure their mobile environment from wherever they are, single dashboard, AI driven, and all that, right? Sounds very nice, but the concept of bringing in all these different technologies into a single platform and all these different ecosystem partners into a single go-to-market is challenging. And the vision is strong, the messaging is strong, the technology is good. We're a nice company to work with, but that next jump of, okay, I've got the vision, how do I enable the motion? Was stymieing for my team and for the partners. And And I think bringing that group together to talk about that problem and crack that nut with the stakeholders, the executives at Ivanti who could drive that change in a really open, collaborative, and passionate, because these people's careers are built on some of these technologies. That was a pretty special part of the last advisory board, I think.
Well, like Michelle, I want to come back to where we started on this. Now, I'm not going to ask you to speak French, mostly because I won't understand you. Um, but advisory boards are a communications medium, and they do require having commonality in language, reference points, specific terms. How important is it to actually make sure that when you're having these conversations, you're not using internal speak versus what the partners are expecting to hear, because the partners are dealing with they're in the Tower of Babel, they're dealing with a bunch of different vendors. Each one of them has their own language. How do you bridge that and make sure that it does remain an open, meaningful, and also clear line of communication?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think there's internal speak and internal intention, and then and reality, right? And I think somehow in the preamble, I've not done this at Avanti, I've done it at previous companies, is allowing for time for the partner advisory board to present back their view of reality to the stakeholders, right? I have been places where you don't have the leverage that the executives think that you should have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just sheer market fit or margin or whatnot. And you somehow have to, in a non-emotional way, create that reality for your executives. You can do that with a preamble. I've done a briefing document that I've worked with all of the partners before that they all sign off on and send as a letter to the CEO. So yeah, you have to create moments where their reality is as valid as your company's reality.
I think that's really important to prep the people going into the room as well,
Yeah.
because an advisory board, as much as it's collegial, you and your team and your peers working with these partners, and these partners all do know each other, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a safe space. And we know that some leaders may not appreciate being questioned or called out, but that's what the advisory board is there for.
Yeah, letting them know what they're going to be called out on if you know. I think there's also environment, right? I am crazy. I hate to be like this. It makes me sound like an awful person, but I'm crazy about who I let in the room, right? And it just takes, one sales rep coming in who, that can destabilize the balance of the environment, right? So creating that safe space, creating an environment of hey, we're here to work together as a group. Pre-briefing is critically important, right? Yeah.
All right. So, Michelle, I'm going to ask you, when we have conversations like this, I always end it this way. It's like, talking to a peer about this, trying to figure out how to make a more meaningful advisory board outcomes. What advice do you give them?
I'd ask them about what they're looking for, right? To think hard about what they want as a result. And I'd probably end up challenging them. Well, get a chance to meet my executives, and I'd probably challenge them on, hey, think about how much more powerful that can be to your overall strategy, to your alignment, the pace of execution, and all those things that you've got to do. Yeah, that's probably what I would do.
Fantastic. Michelle Hodges, thanks for joining us.
Larry, thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
Well, that's about all the time we have for this edition of Changing Channels. I want to thank Michelle Hodges, the Senior Vice President of Global Channels and Alliances at Ivanti, for joining us. And I also want to thank you, as always, for joining us as well. We produce Changing Channels to help exchange information and ideas with everyone in the channel to make this channel community better for everyone. If you like what we're doing here, please hit like, hit subscribe, tell your friends about Changing Channels, as well as our other podcasts, In the Margins and Network Effect. And please do come to Channelnomics and check out all the great information we have on what it takes to make channels operate better and reach higher levels of success. Until next time, I'm Larry Walsh.